Just a minute.
Well, welcome everyone. This is the 1619 Project Discussion Group meeting at the Pasadena Village. We have a good crowd, so we want to get going here promptly. We have a special guest today. Melissa Daniel is going to tell us about her novel that she's written about the Warwick will, which is about her ancestor, John Warwick, and his will, and her experience in learning about her ancestry and in making contact with the other part of her family. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Melissa, and Melissa, we're ready to go.
Okay. Hello, my name is Melissa Daniel. I'm a descendant of the Daniel and Warwick families of England and Virginia. I think we build on the past. Our collective intelligence is constructed from the mistakes we have made and allows for extending into the future with imagination. That was then, this is now, and there is no room for guilt. White guilt has always been a way to avoid honest discussion. Let's begin one. We have time at the end to open up for just that. This talk will be about deconditioning whiteness. In 1606, a private British corporation was awarded a royal charter by England's King James I to possess land along Virginia's coast in order to exploit its resources. It was branded the New World, along the lines of Elon Musk's discovery of the planet Mars. New is a subjective term. To the native Powhatan people, their world, proclaimed as new, was entirely fictional. To them, the world was old, in fact, thousands of years old. But these Brits were in a hurry. A year later, in 1607, the Virginia Company of London sent 120 men on 3 ships to establish the Jamestown settlement, not as a civil society, but as a for-profit commodity extraction and export operation. Unsurprisingly, all went hideously wrong, threatening the total collapse of business. Alas, too many of the settlers were entitled British gentlemen seeking adventure with no practical skills and even less willingness to do the labor. Luckily, there was Poland. Captain John Smith, the English mercenary, who wrangled a leadership role in the new settlement, knew that skilled craftsmen could be fetched for cheap to work as free men in the colony escaping near slavery in Poland. The captain recruited 11 Polish artisans skilled in glass blowing, pitch and tar making, turpentine distillation, soap making, timbering, well digging, and shipbuilding. The Poles rescued the Virginia Company's venture. The necessities they made and profits from exporting them stabilized the Jamestown economy. By 1619, the settlement had grown to a few hundred, and the corporation backed by the crown allowed them to form a lawmaking assembly of freely settled representatives. The Virginia House of Burgesses was the first elected government in British America, but in order to vote, you had to be 1, a landowner, 2, male, 3, an Englishman. Numbers 1 and 3 disqualified the Poles. Skilled as they were, it was presumed they had neither ability nor interest in the higher art of governance. Imagine the shock of those British gentlemen to hear loud cries of no vote, no work. Generally, when big wigs are in a pinch, their lust for power and profit overcomes any quibbling over workers' freedom to vote. On July 21st, 1619, the corporation declared the Poles Englishmen, instantly franchising them. From the corporate perspective of their private business model, this first uprising confirmed their need to enslave. After all, the transatlantic slave trade had been going on for about a century before 1619. Hence, those early Africans aboard the White Lion and Treasure in August of 1619 were part of a pre-planned enslavement policy wherein a racial caste system developed. What is caste but another word for cover-up? It becomes necessary to form groups, much like silos that protect insiders by preventing outsiders from knowing the working policies of power and wealth. If those people knew it was all based upon theft and murder, it would not be tolerated, not even by thousands of English ex-convicts, orphans, and prostitutes swept up from the poorest streets of Britain, literally kidnapped by a king's decree that made returning to England end with death. Thus, whites that were enslaved went under the nicer term of servant for indentured servitude. But in most cases, it ended up slavery for life. Later, white slaves burdened by memories of persecution caused their children to suffer as well through the ineffable transmission of trauma. Traumatized second and third generations opened the opportunity for dividing to conquer. The power elite decreed who should be othered and conditioned to be hated, as was democracy itself. What we are learning is that slavery invented racism, not the other way around. There are few accidents when it comes to corporate greed. Slavery was an age-old practice waiting to be locked systemically into their new world. After all, necessary to every nation in Europe, slavery needed a new identity politics of whiteness, militarized and monetized in order to justify subjugation of continents and peoples with its gargantuan transfer of wealth. Let's call it branding. Fortunately, there are always people who cannot be convinced it is decent to exploit human lives. The dream of freedom and justice remains alive in our consciousness and in our hearts. We know, though it takes hard work, usually underground, to overcome the blind greed of private corporate policy men, they can be stopped. It took the lives of 7 million Americans to outlaw the atrocity of slavery in 1865, and yet the corporate structure still engages in its subtle forms undeterred. Michelle Alexander calls evolving legal revisions the new Jim Crow. Why am I giving this talk? I've had to come to terms with a long family history, beginning with one of those adventurous British gentlemen dressed in ermine from the 1600s, Sir William Daniel. Arriving aboard his own ship from London, I am still searching for more data on him and just exactly what he carried in the hull of that ship. But the real shocker was finding that a powerful English nobleman, known to be what we would today consider a private or vulture capitalist, owned the White Lion and the Treasurer, ships that were landing in Virginia that August of 1619, carrying America's first African human cargo. He was the Earl of Warwick, Robert Rich. Connecting the early Warwicks to this act of enslavement was jolting. To add insult to injury, in the 1700s, those supreme white men created laws to entice and enable their rape of enslaved African women, also causing their offspring to be enslaved as the law intended, creating more property to then continue the crude laws of profit in a sex trade too grotesque to hold any sway in a reasonable mind. Even in a family of enslavers, there's always one who questions the perversity of owning human beings and the disgraceful practice of brainwashing them so thoroughly that some will lose their sense of self-esteem and the agency to dispute those lives. Only some, because it was African people who fought for their freedom at the risk of their lives. It was Africans who fed the whole humanitarian impetus of abolition until a few conscientious white people holding power could assist in their emancipation. To say I was horrified to find my family engaged in slavery is an understatement. But my research also uncovered several who questioned its legitimacy and acted to end enslavement. As I widened my search into the 18th century, I realized many people were influenced by the sociopathic science then promoted widely claiming, if you weaken and give an inch to others, they will grab any advantage and beat you down. Best to control them before they kill you. This was the backwater version popularly called social Darwinism, the misapprehended notion of survival of the fittest. The real Darwin was an abolitionist. Cooperation was his overwhelming understanding of nature's fitness. Its power of wholeness was of much greater significance to him than calculating on being able to control and restrain a huge population of slaves, which was a fantasy then and is a fantasy now. According to Darwin, who was popular to the open-minded of his day, he felt that we are biologically wired to be kind. Wired to be kind. This is where I want to introduce Comida Warwick Dover. She was my beloved cousin from a family, my family, enslaved in the 1800s, and she was an excellent example of kindness. In 2009, Comida's research compelled her to contact my sister, who had just left her email address while visiting the Warwick Publishing House in Lynchburg, Virginia, a mansion that was the birthplace of our great-grandfather, Senator John Warwick Daniel. Comida's subsequent email started my transformation from an oblivious woman of false privilege to a heart broken open, aspiring anti-racist. Comida's email shared documentation that began my re-education and discovery of my roots. Aside from the privateers of human cargo, I descend from 3 generations of abolitionists who found practical ways to bring justice and freedom to the many willing to risk their lives to escape bondage. These abolitionists ended up jeopardizing their lives to help refugees reach freedom safely whenever possible. And they were extremely successful. One in particular, Captain John Warwick, 7 generations back, is the earliest abolitionist ancestor I know of, the ancestor whose son, Frederick Warwick, founded the Warwick Colony at Indian Lake, and who Comida descends directly from, as well as my ancestor, Captain John. Yes, clearly, this was rape. Any engagement in sex, regardless of consent, with an enslaved person is always rape because one needs to be free in order to provide consent. And as we will find, John found ways to reconcile his deed. In 1848, 13 years before the Civil War, upon his deathbed, John did what in those days was unthinkable. He wrote a will freeing his enslaved people and designated his son Frederick, born enslaved, as his heir, the progenitor of the handsome, upright Warwicks of Indian Lake. In another portion of the will, John set aside farmland, parceling his Virginia plantation, deeded for those too old to travel. For Frederick and the remaining freed people, who included the day laborers, the final number came to 300. John ensured their safe passage via his executor, Dr. David Pattison Jr., through Virginia's wilderness, crossing the Ohio River into its free state, where 200 acres were purchased and deeded in their names in Indian Lake for them to thrive as free landowners. It's an extensive story. I've written a book about that is in the process of being published, so I won't go on about it now. But dear cousin Comida gave it her hearty blessing. She had such a dry sense of humor. Once she confided in jest that she'd rather be related to Dionne Warwick. We can see that Captain John's influence was most certainly felt by his nephew, John Marshall Warwick, over much of his youth prior to becoming Lynchburg, Virginia's first mayor. In 1835, John Marshall's wife, Susanna, emancipated their enslaved man, Beverly Snow. Because she was a woman and women had no legal rights, John wrote up and signed the manumission papers for Beverly, who moved to Washington City before it was called Washington, D.C. There, Beverly Snow established the very popular Epicurean Eating House, which basically invented the restaurant as we know it today. Beverly was also acclaimed for the Snow Riot, an incident wherein, due to his being Black, created fear of competition for the poor white immigrants. They tore his restaurant apart, destroying everything in an attempt to ruin his business, and then planned to lynch him. While he was in hiding, Beverly wrote an article published in the Globe, a popular daily newspaper, strongly asserting his innocence. Due to his position among important freedom-leaning white people in town, it became possible for him to escape to Canada with his wife, Julia, Frederick's mother. Slavery had been outlawed in Toronto, where he opened 2 more acclaimed eating houses and grew wealthy. He also helped other African-descended refugees get jobs and enjoy, of course, excellent dining. In 1848, when the president of the Bank of Virginia, John Marshall Warwick, was instrumental in working up the financial documents that supported Frederick and the Warwick colony per his uncle John Warwick's will, until the Civil War wiped out Virginia's legal tender. Once a man of great wealth in Lynchburg, John Marshall lost everything. He had to rent an apartment over his last days, paid for by his grandson, John Warwick Daniel, who also paid his outstanding debt of $150,000, what in those days was a ransom, and cared for him to the end of his days on the salary of an attorney and then a state senator. But kindly, John Marshall Warwick did live to see the grandson he raised dedicate the Washington Monument. Just when I thought everything was going great in the family, relatives popped up who had an entirely different perspective. Covering the pre-Civil War period of 1846 to 1857, another ancestor of the Daniel side of the family in Richmond, Virginia, the Honorable Supreme Court Justice Peter Vivian Daniel dissents on the Dred Scott case, his vote legally diminishing the rights of Africans by disallowing them citizenship regardless of whether enslaved or free. I know it's a breathtakingly immoral act of massive consequence only an advocate of enslavement would make. But before we rush in too quickly to characterize him, I suggest we consider an act of judicial fairness in the decision he brought forward in the cases of 3 enslaved men caught in the hysteria of Nat Turner's uprising that unleashed the fury of a killing mob. Take a breath and try to imagine the atmosphere back then. Fear was wild in the air. Dozens of Black men were hung indiscriminately in the convulsive spirit of revenge. Now we can assess more clearly just what judicial fairness in that moment required. He had to weigh the evidence and try these men, Frank, Jim, and Isaac, for being part of Nat's murdering band. Though already given the death sentence in a lower court, through careful scrutiny, Justice Daniel found them innocent. Thus, they were freed from hanging. He had no finer hour. I'd like to think of this quote by Brian Stevenson, "You are not your worst sin." Let's move on to an ancestor from a younger generation. During the Civil War, Moncure Daniel Conway, a fervent abolitionist, having left his aristocratic family fortune behind to minister to the people, wrote a slim volume called The Missing Stone, referring to the lack of justice in the very foundation of our country. It went through 3 printings, much admired by President Lincoln, who called Conway to meet with him in the White House. At the tender age of 30, this passionate protege of Emerson, a graduate of Harvard Divinity School, stood before the president, unbending in his belief that the war was being fought over slavery. He convinced old Abe that there was no excuse for continuing enslavement and provided him with enough evidence to have the president write the Emancipation Proclamation 3 months after their meeting. It wasn't long after that Conway found his father's enslaved people had escaped from the Conway mansion and were hiding in Alexandria, Virginia. He acquired a letter from General Wool through his relationship with the then abolitionist-leaning Secretary of the Treasury, Salmon P. Chase. The letter gave Conway permission to transport his father's slaves through Maryland to Ohio, a free state. He then drummed up funds and bought them land in advance in Yellow Springs where they could thrive in freedom. Finding his father's 45 enslaved people together at a friend's house in Baltimore, he convinced them to come with him to the train station. It must have been terrifying to be trailed by scores of bigoted people anxious to kidnap them for sale in that far from freedom-loving town. But young Moncure was stern and fierce, pounding his letter with a closed fist and then reading the terrifying words, "Though it should bring the guns of Fort McKinley upon the city." It worked like the hand of God. These Conway people not only made it to Yellow Springs, Ohio, in a train with Moncure by their side, but they later established the First Baptist Church there and were instrumental in the founding of Antioch College. Moncure Daniel Conway was a lifelong anti-war and world peace advocate. Due to these entwined advocacies, he and Andrew Carnegie became friends, as Andrew was also an abolitionist, as well as an advocate for world peace. Conway was not only an abolitionist, he wrote the first biography of Thomas Paine, among other books, and was the agent for many poets and writers, including Walt Whitman. Carnegie, then the wealthiest businessman in the world, attended Conway's funeral in New York among countless luminaries and constructed a building in London dedicating it to him, the Conway Hall Ethical Society. My next book will be about this tireless servant of the people and a moral tower of life's strongest energies. But what of the unfinished work of our abolitionist ancestors? What is abolition without reparations? In my opinion, managing the harm done by slavery is the first goal. What can be done when huge profits were made from the bodies of human beings whose souls have descendants now living in the gruesome epigenetic shadow of that memory? There are sinners and sins committed in the building of global capitalism. The growth of the British manufacturing sector joined with slavery and the slave trade America inherited from England increased enslavement by millions of Africans. This is our history. No lies can sterilize those atrocities. If we are honest, we must stare down that past as it compels us to seek redress from the relevant culpable parties, all of us. Every one of us has profited from slavery to this minute, and we continue to. Let us consider that the African was satisfying the necessities of production better than the European. This makes evident the tremendous role Africans played making possible the development of the most powerful empire on the earth and making the United States a top influential economic power in the history of the world. Here in America, big business is everything. All else is subservient, no different from enslavement. Now a technological empire. The United States has much to gain from focusing on humanitarian issues, learning how to be human enough to hold an open conversation without goal spotting would enrich the less than human, win all, ignore your opponent, and learn nothing point of view that keeps us ignorant and falling behind. Since nothing stands still, learning from someone else is essential to moving forward, making betterment for all. Might it be time for Africans to save America again? We owe their descendants 400 years of back pay for their superior endurance, genius, and strength, in whatever forms can be produced with the inclusion of their input and ideas, land, money, free education, private pre-K, and any and all forms of reparations for our combined imaginations can produce. It's hard to listen and be open to new ideas if we already know the truth and insist our version of the facts is airtight and unimpeachable. But first, let's go back to those early days and find out what might have been in the hull of that ship. Maybe we can construe what that old meaning hurt people might mean to us, and why those who are terribly hurt are standing dangerously in the way of progress. First, we'll go to London. No, let's go to all of England. It's the 1600s, where everyone not of the upper class experiences cruelty and extreme privations. This was misery at a scale we can barely begin to fathom. This is where the birthing of capitalism served only those few at the top and enabled their absolute dominance over the poor, or what I prefer to call the purposely deprived. Now let's look at the Marshalsea, a prison in England run privately for profit. It captured debtors, pirates, smugglers, and political figures charged with sedition. Over half the population of England's prisoners by the 18th century were in jail because of debt. By the way, our modern day Marshalsea here in America has been transformed into a DIY prison for sleeping on the streets all across this country, where if you are poor, you make it with a pup tent. Deprivation was the reason many fled England for the New World, indenturing into slavery in error, thinking they were escaping and would only have 7 years to work it off. Imagine the disappointment many felt arriving in a truly primitive environment where it was up to them to survive, and then to be told it was for life. Packed into the hulls of those ships with them were between 50,000 and 120,000 British convicts transported to the new colony. The reason why most of us have never heard of this is because British convicts were politely renamed servants. The British colony of Virginia now depended upon the labor of convicts, vagabonds, and orphaned waifs swept from the streets of English cities. These British citizens, ejected from debtors' prisons and barely able to leave that trauma behind, had no choice but to thrust it upon their children as dirty pain, with nowhere to go but out to others. This infused early society with violence. To this day, trauma has not been dealt with honestly, nor has the violence. Plain and simple, it was slavery, British slavery. Only those who could rise above the horrors of the Middle Passage, where the hull of the ship carried up to 300 white convicts, loaded to the maximum, allowing only 2 feet for each passenger, to be locked below for 5.5 weeks, fed unfit food and roiling in disease. If they survived and had the resilience to bounce back, exulting in the freedom from that suffering, to imagine a better chance to start again, they were lucky to maybe make an honest living, live a useful life, and perhaps prosper. Harsh as it was for them, some saw the alternative as far worse. Now, you can make jokes about Australia, but we see the same thing is happening in America. And this would be the precursor of the same treatment for Africans. Many so-called white slaves welcomed the later shipments from Africa because they were trained via a tsunami of conditioning that they could other Africans through the developing system of caste, congratulating themselves for not being Black. Rivalries arose when these whites resisted the master's preference for the African due to their strength and stamina. This rivalry set in from the beginning in Virginia, and after the big plantation owners chose the Africans as well and made use of the divide and conquer mechanism, which supported their need for total dominance, the con was in. Naturally, deprived whites were harmed by lack of prestige, living in grinding poverty. This was another inherited socialization and conditioning that makes more evident their hatred of Africans, not for anything lacking in Africans, in the reverse, for their greater efficacy and seeming wealth, when they were given good clothing and care, living on some of the wealthiest plantations, in comparison to the non-educated and starving whites. Then, being referred to as poor white trash by the masters of the enslaving class was adding insult to their suffering. This can perhaps lend a bit of understanding to the joyous faces and images of a little bit better off white people joining in festivities in the torture and murder of an African as they awaited the grand moment of a lynching. I tried to understand how that could create amusement, I learned when you consider the way tortured white people were conditioned by every form of lie imaginable, incited to regard Africans poorly, and after many generations of previous torment in England, their embodied experience at the core of their DNA was crudely to enjoy violence. Perhaps it was a form of projection away from their own suffering, relief that it wasn't happening to them, or even revenge. I also try to consider the horrendous treatment their descendants received from broken parents who punished their kids as a form of entertainment. It only makes sense that they would prefer to visit pain upon others who had even less agency. Although claiming the kindness of Jesus and Christianity as their religion, that could never come close to taming the scale of their pain and unmet trauma. These hurt people are still hurting people. For the most part, our African sisters and brothers from the Kingdom of Angola, where they had been converted to Roman Catholicism by their elites as early as the 15th century, were able to elicit the essential heart of Jesus found in Christianity by creating their own Black church, building community, and making massive progress in the opening of their hearts, practicing forgiveness in situations to this day that only a saint could endure. To continue living the lies we were raised with will not improve our situation. Today's Jim Crow 2.0 is far worse than those early years, though more subtle. From George Washington to George Floyd, we white people desperately need to learn how to practice truth and forgiveness. Rather than resorting to rivalry, which is just another word for divide and conquer, let's learn from our Black sisters and brothers and the examples of our rich history of abolitionism. We have wide shoulders to stand on with the giants in our ancestry. There is no reason to continue with faulty conditioning when there is so much beauty to call our own. Whew. Sorry. Okay, and we have much to accomplish together. We are hurtling towards a crisis of climate catastrophe that we're all in together, not each alone. It is a collaborative consciousness that is essential for survival at home and abroad. It is now literally a matter of survival. We learn to authentically cooperate or we are doomed. Because of American white supremacy, our original sin, we need reparations in order for healing even to be possible, not merely personal repentance, relational reconciliation, or institutional reform, although all are needed. This work of reparations, as an explicit expression of its historical culpability, is to center voices other than white. By its very nature, the conversation around reparations includes two parties, those who owe reparations and to those to whom reparations are owed. I see our responsibility as whites to acknowledge our collective historical culpability in it and to provide ethical resources. However, the specific shape that reparations ought to take and the concrete ways in which the American theft of truth, power, and wealth is to be repaired is properly the work of those on the other side of the conversation. I believe it is our place as whites who have not suffered the ravaged deprivations that white supremacy inflicted upon African Americans, not to lead, but to follow, to let our voices give way to the voices of the unheard. They have a great deal to teach us. But first, we must be humble about what we think we know. We need to allow that human nature is primarily a collection of unconscious processes, deep emotions, and clashing desires. It's impossible to build a healthy society entirely on self-interest. Our first president, George Washington, got all sort of crazy here. Basically, he said that without morality, it's impossible for us to thrive. So ours becomes a partnership between those who are living, those who are dead, and those to be born in this symphony of creation. Before we go on to questions and discussion, I want to thank Jim Hightower of The Lowdown, Eric Williams of Capitalism and Slavery, Dr. Gerald Horn, Michelle Alexander, Isabel Wilkerson, Henry Louis Gates Jr., James Baldwin, Ibram X. Kendi Ta-Nehisi Coates, Dr. Cornell West, Toni Morrison, Maya Angelou, Alice Walker, and dozens of scholars and writers I have gained immensely from over the years, and the fellowship of the members of coming to the table. But I have more than anyone to thank Kamita Warwick Dover, my Black cousin, who single-handedly led to opening my mind to the history of my family and to the need for justice missing from society, as well as for joy and love. She left this earth December 27th, but she will never, ever be forgotten. Oh, and I must thank Steve, my husband and muse, for his support in every way. And of course, thank you, Richard, for inviting me to share with everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. Are you ready for some questions now?
I am ready.
All right. Well, if anyone, so the floor is open. If anyone has questions, just go ahead and unmute yourself and fire away.
Okay.
I just want to say that I loved how you found deep empathy with all the different characters in the different sides of this story. I thought that was very beautiful.
Thank you. It was hard.
I know you got it for the very guilty, the somewhat guilty, the little bit guilty, and the innocent. And that is easy to achieve.
Thank you, Craig.
Uh-huh.
I have a question. This is Linda.
Yes.
First of all, thank you so much for your heartfelt research and telling the truth, which is rare these days. I have one question and maybe one thing that weighs heavy on my heart.
All right.
What do you mean by deconditioning whiteness? And also, you spoke of reparations for African Americans who've been here 400 years and had their birthplaces and birthrights stolen. But I'm of the mind that we can't have that until we have a reckoning of what the settlers did to Native Americans.
Oh, okay. Well, first of all, deconditioning whiteness is an attempt to get the idea that whiteness is a fantasy, that it is something that was invented for reasons having to do with capitalism, and that there's no, the color has nothing to do with anything real, except for what beautiful things we see before our eyes, okay? As far as reparations, I'm just getting started with Holly Mitchell, who is our state councilwoman, I think. I'm not sure, but I'm getting involved with, she's the first person to start reparations in California. And this is going to be something, the subject of Native Americans is always going to come in and be figured out. I'm sort of specializing, due to my history, on African American people. But to say the very least, the Native Powhatan people, right smack on the very beginning days of landing on the shores of Virginia, have to be recompensed in some way. So it's going to be very complicated, but California is the first state that's going to be talking about reparations, finally. So thank you for your question.
All right, thank you. Who's next?
Melissa,
The floor is open.
Melissa, I just wanted to say thank you so much for this incredible talk, your research and your kindness.
Thank you.
Your smile when you said that. And as was just pointed out to all people, all of your ancestors and all of the people that you came across, I do find this is a fascinating topic in terms of now the way that people are trying to even avoid teaching any any history
I know.
in our schools.
It's just crazy.
Well, it makes perfect sense. It does, because if they feel like, I guess if they have to look at it, then they have to do something about it. And
Amen.
so, yes. So just hope that the word continues to go. I hope that things in California work well, and maybe we can here in Wisconsin. I'm always hopeful. But, you know, just thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for being here. I can't believe it. I'm so happy.
Thank you. No, I had to see it. Thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Melissa, can you tell us anything about the publishing date for your novel? Is any status of where that is?
As you can imagine, it's a pretty honest and pretty rugged piece of work. And there's been about 500 people who have turned it down. So I'm still in the process of attaining an agent. I'm going through that process right now. I'm still getting some turn downs, but I do have 3 or 4 people who have the entire manuscript and they're reading it. So we don't know how long it might take, but it should be sooner than what has gone behind. You know, I've been going through this for about 5 years. So it's going to take a bit of doing.
Melissa, this is Melba Swafford.
Yes, hello.
Hi, I was pleased also to hear your comments about reparations, because in the past, it has always seemed to have been linked to just money, financial type reparations. And I like the fact that you linked it also to societal, governmental policy, and positioning of all aspects of the larger world.
We can only hope and pray and work hard. We have a lot of work to do before we go.
Melissa, I wanted to say how proud I am of you and to be related to you. And that was so heartfelt. My heart was hurting a lot through that, and yet hopeful the way that you present the opportunities. And I'm grateful for the history and the perspective. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining in. I love your energy.
Thank you. Thank you. I must go now.
All right.
Steve,
Take care.
bye, Steve.
Okay.
I have a question actually about your attempt to get it published.
Yes.
Having just been through this for several years, but I would like to send you the name of at least 2 people who might be helpful, and you can keep it in the background until you hear from the 2 who have the manuscript.
Okay.
So I assume that somebody, Wayne or Richard, have your email address.
He does. Richard does. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, fine.
I would really appreciate that. Thank you very much. Well, great thought.
Well, you never know till you try.
That's true. That's
Over and
true.
over and
Trying is
over and
trying.
over again. Yes, yes.
Melissa, I had a question. Do you think the difficulty in getting it published has anything to do with legal liability?
No, I don't think so. I've
Okay.
had it checked through several different people. And it's just America right now is going through a sort of, I don't know, I guess it's been the past few years since our last president. There's been a sort of a shift. And I don't know, that's the only thing I can think of is that there's not enough open-mindedness in the New York publishers, which is basically who I've been reaching out to. I do have someone in Santa Fe who's reading it, and we'll see what she thinks. But yeah, I mean, in terms of which way would you be referring the legal?
Well, I just wondered if people might challenge the research and, be upset about what you're revealing, that kind of thing.
I see. Well, it's a novel. So doesn't have the same problems as a nonfiction book.
Right.
So, but it's a good thought. I could have my lawyer read it, but I don't think that would help.
I thought because it was partly based on a real story.
Oh,
That,
there is. Yeah.
Might be
Yeah.
a problem.
Sure.
Well, that a publisher would have to decide whether or not they wanted to engage in verifying. I have a giant bibliography that goes with it. So it's all available. It's all true.
I could see this as a masterpiece theater kind of thing.
I know, it would make a great movie. It really would. There's a lot of, the whole end of it, I guess you would call it the Book of Frederick, is all about the African Americans creating a world in Indian Lake and ending up with this fantastic platform that is like the inspiration for the $1 Million kind of, playground that occurred, and people like Louis Armstrong and just a bunch of people made their debuts on that stage in the dark, just among their own people. So it's kind of wonderful.
I was interested. The name of the title of your book, is that in flux?
It's in flux. We're using, the working title is the Warwick Will, which is what we've been using, but we have another title.
Melissa, you had mentioned to me in a conversation that you had recently done a presentation in Ohio, I think, about the Warwick family, and I was wondering if you could tell us a little more about that. That might be some interesting stories to tell about that.
There was a eulogy for Kamita for her passing, and there were about 100 people there, and I would say maybe 10 or 15 of them were white. Everybody was part of the family and friends. I knew quite a few of them because I've been going back and forth, and I've known Kamita for 12 years. So it was a joyous and beautiful experience to be with them. And I did get a few laughs, which was nice. The story about Kamita, rather preferring to be related to Dionne Warwick, took a huge laugh across the room, because I think they really got that, and she just was such a beautiful person and inspired so many people, that there were musicians and music and just people enjoying the fact that she was flying, that she was no longer suffering. She had such a terrible ordeal, basically, with cancer, that it was like we were all just celebrating the fact that she was free. So it was quite a beautiful experience.
And did you make a presentation there about your?
I did. Yeah, just talking about her and what it was like, knowing her, and a little bit about the family, because it was something that was unfolding in front of both of us. We traveled to Virginia, we traveled to Washington, D.C., and went to all of the places where you can get really very, very hard to find data. And, just so sometimes it was actually funny to us that the people that were doing the, containing all of that information were so sort of, how do you put it? They didn't seem like they knew what they were doing that much, but it sure as heck worked, because we just tried and tried and tried till we got through and found different bits of information. Stephen was with me in Washington, D.C., and dug through a big pile of books in the library there, and found the connection with the Quakers, which we had no idea, except it felt like it, And so when we found that there was actual people that, were listed in their Quaker in registry, that was a big day. It was very exciting. So being able to connect that. Because when we went to John Warwick, Captain Warwick's grave, it was just grass. It was this regular cemetery with all kinds of headstones everywhere. And his wife and his son had no headstones whatsoever. And it made no sense until we found out that they were Quakers. And then it was like, of course, that's the way you bury a Quaker, is with no show. So it was kind of beautiful.
I'm also curious about the, when John Warwick wrote his will, you said he provided acreage for the people to live on.
Yes.
And I'm wondering what has evolved from that and what kind of communities are there today, and something about the history of what that whole experience is like.
There are 2 plots of land which were basically legally plotted. And the people still, every generation continues living on that land. And they're still there today. Camina and I went and talked with them. They're also cousins, and it was just amazing to me. I mean, the whole thing is really an amazing story, all in all, but I'm pretty ignorant of that kind of stuff normally, except specifically through the family data and information. But that was quite an interesting thing. One of the houses that was being rented to a woman, the father of that woman wrote a book about this stuff. He kind of kept it in that local area, but he had to publish it himself because it was just, I don't know. I'm not sure why, but it was something that happened. I always, as a little girl, my father used to be so proud of my great-grandfather because he was a senator and had, all these things that he took with him from Virginia to California. We were raised in Santa Monica, you can believe it. And so he hung on to a lot of these things. He told me about the Earls of Warwick, and I had no connection to that except a memory. And when I found that, and I just couldn't believe it. It was like, yes, he was telling the truth. So sometimes that's the way things are, it's handed down.
And how is all of this received in various elements of the family relationships around with cousins?
Well, yeah, I'm about ready to find out. But my dear sister, Vivian, who has the name that's part of the Supreme Court judge's name. And I don't think my father even knew about that. I think that was something that was so buried in the history that it was another cousin of ours that had that name. And I think he named her that from a different source. But I hope she doesn't get upset because I don't think she ever knew about this until today. So we'll see.
Right, to be determined.
To be determined.
Part of the continuing story, I guess.
Yeah.
Right. Is what you just read to us, is that published in some form somewhere?
No, this is just something I wrote up since October when I was at a party and Richard reached out to me and said, would you like to do a talk about this? And I guess I must have been talking about the family in some way because we were in a group of people that are all, descended from enslavers.
Right.
So I said, sure, and then I just started jotting things down and now we've got like 14 pages.
Yeah.
You know how it is.
That group that you mentioned was coming to the table.
Yes.
And we're going to have a presentation in March, on the third Friday in March, about that group and what it's all about, and the local organization. And so we're going to be talking about the goal of that group and the organization and how it works and what we've experienced in being part of that.
Oh, fantastic.
So that's an upcoming presentation for the 1619 project.
Wonderful.
Melissa, this is Adrian Panton.
Yes.
Did you, now I noticed, I read somewhere when I was reading about your background information. By the way, your talk was very, very informative. I really appreciate it. And the story is just fascinating.
Thank you.
Now, your name was originally Warwick Daniel. Is that,
Yes.
is that?
Yeah, my
Oh,
father
oh.
was John Warwick Daniel the third. And my brother was John Warwick Daniel the fourth. So I just went with Daniel. It's like,
Gotcha.
I didn't want to have that, but I do use as an author's name, I have M. Warwick Daniel. Something Kamita suggested, and it's sort of precious to me because of her. So.
Right. Okay. That's very, very good. Very interesting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All right, who's next?
Is your family tree on Ancestry?
Part of it is, yes. I sort of gave up on that after I went out physically and started going through records and seeing things myself. I guess the answer would be sort of a little bit.
I didn't know if maybe it was somewhere and then you were sharing it with family members or anybody who asked.
Not really. It was such a shock to me, of somebody who was raised in Southern California and no idea, except I should have. I mean, we had Sir William Daniel hanging in a gold frame over the dining room table, and things like that. But I just sort of, I guess you might say I had an aversion for history. So it took me meeting Kamita. I flew to Ohio and met her and realized, I mean, she looks just like me, except she was a darker shade. And it was just like love at first sight. I just knew that she was related to me. And yet I had to take in this entire revelation, basically, of slavery as being part of my family all the way back to England. So I'm an artist. And so for me, I just got to work right away, putting everything together that I could. I read like 300 books. It was, I just couldn't fool around with Ancestry.com, to be honest. It just seemed paltry in comparison to, what I had face to face. And we went out to Indian Lake together. We stomped over a large area. That something I want to do is get a plaque for the many, many Warwicks that were the freed Black Warwicks that were buried there. There was this is part of the book, there was a terrible issue where all of these wonderful people came across. It cost $60,000 in those days. That's a ton of money for the executor to get them to pass through the gateway, so to speak, of the city hall and all that. And then they were sold land that 200 acres, unfortunately, was near where the Lewiston Dam was being built, and it was getting flooded. And basically it became stagnant. A lot of the people died, like 50% of the people died from malaria. And so the area is just blessed by all of these people's bodies and their lives. And so there's an actual cemetery of stone headstones and all that with some of these people's names on them. We want to get a fence around that area and put a plaque up to, dedicate to them. A little bit of honor for the beautiful things they did.
It's interesting to me that everybody likes to feel superior to somebody.
Yes.
And that the white supremacy issue surfaced with the paupers and the prisoners lording it over the slaves who were brought in from Africa.
Absolutely.
And that happens, I mean, it can be white on white as well.
Oh, yeah.
My family lived because we came on the Mayflower.
Okay.
And until I read the book and I learned what really happened, Yeah, I mean, we bought it.
Yeah.
Now I'm ashamed of it.
Oh, you shouldn't be, because you're a beautiful person. You know what I mean? It doesn't matter.
But it made us feel superior to other people.
Yeah.
And that was the wrong thing that
Yeah.
I was taught.
I understand. I understand.
Hi, Melissa, I want to thank you. Much of your story of your growing up with relatives is I relate to, and how I was educated, so to speak, about the whole issue of slavery. And you've put a term for me, which is I am a descendant of enslavers. And it's a burden and it's a privilege in a way anyway, thank you. And I do have a book of my great grandmother's memories of living during that time, and went to college in a boxcar ahead of the Civil War.
Wow. Oh, that's fantastic. I mean, are you a member of CTT? Coming to
Of who?
Coming to the table?
No, I know about it.
Oh, you'll find out about it. It's coming up in the next.
I was at Chautauqua a couple of years ago, and the founder talked about coming to the table. I'm a member of the village and I live at Villa Gardens.
All right.
Where Dick is.
You might want to engage with there are so many, descendants of enslavers, and we think we might be cousins. There were so few people back then, so it's a burden, but I see what you're saying. It is a privilege to open your heart,
Right. What next? We've got a few minutes left here. So if anybody else has anything they'd like to say or comment on, or any other contribution. All right.
I look forward to your book.
Well, thank you. I'll definitely let Richard know as soon as it gets, somebody gets their hands on it and says they want to publish it.
Good.
Nancy, who's here, I think she's still here. You're still
Yeah.
here, Nancy. She just went through this whole ordeal.
It's
She
an
just
ordeal.
published a book.
Yeah, that's what I said. I would get Melissa's email from you or Dick and send her what information I have.
How long did it take you?
Right. I'm Nancy Fine. Okay.
And Nancy, how long did it take your book to get through?
Well, the problem is getting an agent. It took me.
That's right.
To get an agent, it took me, which I did several years ago. It took about, in fact, it took 80 email, queries in order to get an agent. And then the agent I got was just fiddling around, let's say.
Oh, sure.
And so then I had to learn how to get rid of that agent without offending her. And then it was number 125 that got me an agent who's been with me now for 10 years.
Oh, wow.
And,
Excellent.
But she had trouble selling the book, even after the last book I wrote, after it took her about 2.5 years.
Wow.
And just when I decided I was going to have to self-publish, which I desperately didn't want to do, she said, give me 3 more months.
Oh, wow.
And she got the right person.
Well, congratulations. It's
but it's a draining.
Yeah.
Yes.
I know.
Yeah.
How does one find what I need at this stage, because I want to put together an album of my poetry, especially about COVID. And where do I find someone like an editor who can look at my things and say, yes or no, this is publishable, or maybe it's not?
I would start by asking in the village if there's anyone who knows an editor.
I already did. I didn't get a response.
Okay.
Yes.
You didn't tell me, Nancy.
No.
I actually have an editor.
No, I have someone who sort of specializes in things related to China. So,
yeah.
All right. Well, I do have an editor who I can give you her name, or if I can give it to Richard and he
Okay,
can get it to you. She's wonderful. She does screenplays as well as novels. And I don't know that she does poetry, but maybe she does. I don't know. I've never
maybe
tried.
she knows someone who does, because I'm
could.
just kind of lost right now.
All right. Well, we'll send her name to Richard. Judy.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
You're welcome.
So I'm gonna have to go.
Yeah, thank you very much, Melissa.
Thank you for
So
everything.
much, yes.
Someone has their hand up.
Oops.
Whoever it
Yeah.
is, I can't see the hand up. So whoever it is, go ahead and unmute yourself and ask the question.
Imelda. Go ahead, Imelda. Hi.
Is it Imelda?
I think she's muted. It's
She's muted?
ICA's iPhone.
She's muted.
She has to be muted because she's talking.
Well, Melba knows how to unmute herself, so. If it's Melba, she'll figure it
It's
out.
ICA's phone.
Yeah, it says ICA's iPhone.
Okay, I don't know who that is.
But we can't hear you.
No.
Oh,
Let me see
well.
if, let me see if I
Now
can
you're
send her.
muted, ICA.
She has to unmute herself.
Sharon, are you co-hosting?
I am.
You are? Can you read some of the chat? Because they can't read it.
Oh, you want me to read some of the chat or?
For Dick,
Okay,
he can't read it.
okay, I'm gonna go to the top then. Ooh, it's a lot of chats. Forget, I don't know if, I'll go ahead and read it anyway. Forgive me for being late. This is from Tommy or Tomai. I missed the introduction of Melissa. What is the title of her book? The Warwick Will.
Right.
Okay. I'm so sorry that I have to leave and miss out on this discussion. Amazing amount of research with so much that's now uncovered. Thank you for this. That's from AS.
Okay.
See you. Yeah. This is from Tom.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
That might be Adele Solomon. I'm thinking.
No, that was AS to everyone. This next one is from Tame Martin. Do you think the resistance is simply because it is about racism in America?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. From Linda Pope, Melissa, your truth-telling is the primary way to battle against what keeps America ignorant. You are courageous. God bless.
Thank you.
From Karen J. Thank you again, Melissa. I have to go as well, but so appreciated this and we'll see you soon. Okay, Tame Martin again, amen, Linda. And then from Allison Thomas, +1, Linda. And then from Nancy Pine, is what you just read published in some form somewhere?
We already asked that.
Yeah.
Okay, Will Fuller, I must leave now. Thank you, Dick, for arranging this, and thank you, Melissa, for bringing us this vital story.
Thank you all.
From Allison Thomas, thank you so much, Melissa. I am sorry that I have to leave. Such a great story. From Linda Pope, perhaps one way to begin to help keep truth alive is for each of us to contribute to an HBCU, historically Black college or university.
Yeah.
Hampton would be a good one if you want to donate money.
Okay.
From Mark, slave stories I think he meant you might find interesting, but I think he meant to add more, but it's a semicolon, yeah. ICA's iPhone, awesome, Melissa, beautiful, 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 with an emoji with hearts.
Oh.
Soul work inspirational with prayer hands.
Thank you.
From Mark, Henry Box Brown, Celia, Margaret Garner, Marie Joseph DeAngelique, Rebecca Cox Jackson, Ridoshi, Esteban Vanico, and Black Caesar. I think this is when he was starting to list before. Yeah, he was the one that said slave stories you might find interesting.
Oh, I see.
That's what all those names were for.
I see. Thank you.
Right. Okay, from Linda Simmons, for your own protection and peace of mind, you may wish to consult with a literary lawyer before my book was published, I had about 3 to 4 consultations with mine, and I found him most helpful. He also pointed out that book authors do not have the same protections that TV, radio, and print media personnel have.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. I have to leave, but this was a very lovely discussion. That's from AO. Thank you, Melissa. ICA's iPhone. Violence equals divide and conquer. I think it's going to take the same kind of struggle, peaceful nonviolence in the street, like our ancestors from Dr. Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, etc., and all the blood and hate they were able to endure for civil rights to get reparations. From Craig Z, what a great job you did. Congratulations, honey. From Tom and Martin, your book would be another tool to bring to the table of racial reconciliation.
Let's hope so.
From Leah Dawson, this was wonderful.
Oh, how great. Oh, I love her.
From Charlotte Bocage.
Oh, Bocage.
And yeah, Bocage dash loss. I don't have the rest of the name there. Great story, Melissa.
Oh,
and
wonderful.
that's it.
Quite a compliment. Thank you very much.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Okay, Melissa, if you would like to have that chat, you can save it by just going to the chat and in the lower right corner, click on the ellipsis down there and you'll get a drop down that says save chat and it'll put it on your computer in a text file.
Okay.
And anybody can do that, by the way. If anybody wants to save any of the comments or see anything that was in the chat, you can do that.
Okay, how do you save it? I've got it over here.
Open the chat box
I
and
got
then
it.
go down to the lower right corner
Oh,
and you
okay.
see an ellipsis there. Click on
Thank
that.
Thank
There
you.
go.
I got it.
Now it's on your computer and the next problem is to find it.
All right. Okay. Oh, wonderful.
So,
Wow, thank you so much. This is
thank
quite an
you,
experience.
Melissa. This was a very interesting presentation. We really appreciate your coming and doing it for us. And when your book is ready, we'll come back and do one just on your book.
Awesome. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just say one thing to Melissa?
Yes.
Fellowship from Monrovia Church has a Center for Racial Reconciliation that they do workshops all the time. And I think you would be an excellent speaker.
Oh, wonderful. Oh, thank you. Fellowship Church.
Yes.
Okay.
In Monrovia.
In Monrovia. Okay, wonderful.
Right.
What is your name?
I'm Tommy Martin.
Tommy Martin.
Oh, that's Tommy Martin.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah. All right. John Williams, I believe it is the one that's over it. His name is John Williams.
Okay.
All right.
And Tommy, would you send me an email? I would like to visit with you about that.
If you could put your information in the chat or.
Yeah, it's
okay.
just rgmyers@gmail.com and you can find me on our website too, but I'll put it in the chat here.
Oh, okay. RT Myers?
RG.
RG.
Richard Gordon. So let me.
Okay. I'll look for it.
Okay, let's see. I have trouble with vision and typing, so.
That's okay.
It's a
We're all
little-
there. Take your time.
I'll type it for you.
Okay, there, I got it up there now, I think. So it's in the chat, I believe, if I got it right.
Thank you.
rgmyers@gmail.com. Yeah, just send me an email, Tommy, and I'd like to
Okay.
visit with you about that. And
Okay. All right.
all right, great. Well, thanks, everyone. With that, we'll close the meeting and check out. And we look forward to, hope you enjoyed this and hope you'll come back and visit us in some of our future presentations.
Thank you.
So
Oh,
Thank you.
Thank
thanks
you,
very much,
Melissa.
everyone.
Thank you, Dick.
thank you.